If this book exists, you're in the wrong universe. An excerpt from Projections into the Void by Dr. Albert Marconi. Before I proceed, allow me to address the proverbial elephant in the room. How can an educated man like myself believe in powerful, cruel entities that exist in the void of the unknown? In fact, does that belief not just as egregiously conflict with my identity as a man of faith? To answer this, I am afraid I must introduce you to Lalak. Here I should warn you that what I am about to share is only for those with strong stomachs and an exceptional tolerance for reading about the suffering of innocents. The rest of you may wish to skip to the next chapter. First, allow me to establish some context. In the Chinese province of Shanxi, a dig site revealed an ancient city dating back more than 4,000 years. Under one stone wall was found 80 skulls of young girls, the remains of a mass human sacrifice intended to imbue the foundation with supernatural protection. In the town of Huanchaco, Peru, experts unearthed the 500-year-old remains of more than 200 sacrificial victims, all children between the ages of 5 and 14. Engineers laying a waterline in Oxfordshire, England, dug up 24 butchered skeletons dating back nearly 3,000 years, including a woman who'd had her arms bound and feet severed. These grisly discoveries lay bare for us a harsh but undeniable truth, which is that our frivolous modern lifestyle was purchased with oceans of blood. The god I am about to discuss, Lalak, is the cruelest known to me, but that means little considering how much of human history was not documented at all. No doubt some were worse. If so, I myself am satisfied to never know their names, just as a few moments from now, you may find yourself wishing you had never heard of Lalak. Under modern Mexico City, you will find the centuries-old remains of Tenochtitlan. There, archaeologists have recovered thousands of skulls of human sacrifice victims, many of which would have had their chests hacked open by Aztec priests and their still-beating hearts ripped out before their heads were removed and impaled on a rack for public display. Here, I offer my second warning about the subject matter. The paragraph you just read is tame compared to what is coming. Lalak, you see, was one of the deities the Aztecs were attempting to please with their brutality, a god of fertility and water who was worshipped for more than 15 centuries. His reign may date back even further. Reach back in time and you will often find familiar gods reigning under older, now forgotten names. Lalak was believed to grant the rains that nourished the crops, as well as the hailstorms that ruined them, depending on his fickle mood. If Lalak was displeased, he could withhold the rain entirely, dooming the local population to a slow death via starvation. And what pleased Lalak, the Aztecs believed, was the tears of children. Thus, in one recent find, the skeletons of 42 children were discovered among the sacrificial offerings at the Great Pyramid of Tenochtitlan, mostly males of an age wherein a modern child would be attending kindergarten. Here is where we must remember that the children's blood was not sufficient for Lalak. The tears were his prize. That is why every single tiny skeleton bore signs of intentionally inflicted dental cavities and abscesses, as well as broken and infected bones. Those were wounds specifically intended to impose constant, unthinkable suffering over the course of weeks or months prior to sacrifice. If a child's weeping were to cease in the course of the final ceremony, their hands and feet would be burned, their fingernails ripped out, lest Lalak be enraged by the insufficient wailing. These sacrifices were performed in mass before, during, and after the growing season. Children were tortured to thank Lalak for rains provided in the past. Children were tortured to atone for sins committed in the present. Children were tortured to ensure productive rains in the future. This went on for century after century after century. Now, please, ask me again why I believe in the existence of dark gods. Understanding why this occurred in so many places and for so long seems paramount to understanding humanity, society, and, in my opinion, the nature of the universe we inhabit. Volumes have been written about how these practices came about, but in my view, they had to have occurred for only one of two reasons. 1. A cruel, possibly deranged deity made contact with primitive peoples and deceived them into mutilating their own children for reasons incomprehensible to a sane mortal mind. too. These peoples peered into the void, and, finding nothing, chose to believe that it contained powerful, undying beings who demanded the anguish of their innocent children as a form of tribute, nourishment, or both. My friends, if I am mistaken in my belief that the truth lies in something like option number 1, please see it as a form of wishful thinking. An old man who prefers not to believe that such a call is coming, as they say, from inside the house. This brutal method of worship is the oldest known to us. It is even theorized by some scholars that human sacrifice actually predates both religion and written language. This would mean that, long before humans were capable of complex thought or mythology, tribes from all over the globe looked to the sky and sensed that it hid a chorus of sadistic, ravenous faces. As for how I can reconcile this with my Christianity, I would note that the Old Testament does not assert that the bloodthirsty gods of rival nations, such as Baal or Moloch, were imaginary, only that they were cruel and unworthy of worship. Of course, my atheist friends are fond of reminding me that Yahweh himself ordered his followers to punish rival tribes with total annihilation, specifying that yes, not even their children were to be spared. I can assure you, I have spent more time pondering this than you know. I am also aware that when the Spanish were forcibly converting the indigenous people of Mexico to Christianity 5 centuries ago, they told worshippers of Moloch the story of God demanding Abraham sacrifice his son Isaac. For you see, this was how they reassured them that their gods were not so different after all. Sunday, August 21st, 8:58 p.m. Strawberry popsicles. Hunger at 98%. Me. A man was talking. It wasn't John. I felt like I was going to fall, and I put my hands down and catch myself, only to find I was sitting in the lotus position on a dirty floor. I found myself in a large, dim, musty room. A chain-link fence just a couple of feet from my face. Beyond the fence in the darkness were rows of moldy seats. I whipped my head around and found Amy sitting next to me, John next to her. Amy met my eyes, and her startled expression said that she had experienced the same jump forward in time I had, unless by sheer coincidence she was being startled by something unrelated. She immediately reached up to her face and stuck her fingers in her mouth. It only occurred to me later that she was making sure her tongue was still there. We were inside the kennel we had just been looking at in the photo on Facebook. I was unsurprised, yet still alarmed, to find the magpie egg on the floor right behind us, on our side of the chain link. The fucking thing had mind-controlled us right into its pen. Standing directly in front of the kennel was Sebastian Galvatron, closing a padlock on the kennel gate, tugging on it a couple of times to double-check. He wasn't the one talking, though. There was a college-age man in a black overcoat nearby on the stage, finishing a sentence. "They certainly won't be laughing then." He was putting on some kind of an accent. He was pale, and his hair was a mop of greasy curls. I think he'd modeled his look after Sherlock Holmes as he appeared in the BBC series starring a British actor whose name at the moment was coming up in my mind as Benito Crimblesnatch. That's the look he was going for, anyway. He actually looked like the kind of guy who'd stay up late flirting with girls on social media, then switch accounts and spam them with rape threats if they'd rejected him. He looked like the kind of guy who soothed himself to sleep at night with fantasies of peeling the skin off his high school bullies. He looked like the kind of guy who, in middle age, would get a job with some modicum of power over others and make their lives hell. There was movement to my left. Inside the kennel, John was frantically brushing something off his shirt. His cigarette had fallen out of his mouth because, from his point of view, it had suddenly appeared between his lips, and it had presumably tumbled out when he'd opened his mouth to ask what the fuck was going on. Amy pulled out her phone, I thought to check the time, but she instead went right into the magpie's feeding app. She showed me the hunger meter. The stomach symbol had been almost entirely taken over by ravenous red. Within minutes, the egg was due to start howling for its meal of tons, and, once it got it, the assistant body parts collector known as Swallow would presumably emerge. It's hard to say which of these two events would be worse for us. Under my breath, I asked her, "How long has it been?" "It's almost 9, so about 6 hours." Jesus Christ. A whole quarter of the day gone. More if you only count the part you're awake. What in the hell had this thing been making us do? For all I knew, we'd committed multiple shooting rampages. Somewhere on the stage could be a garbage bag full of tons we'd collected. We could have gone on camera and done a 6-hour-long Christian rap concert. Nothing was off the table. Benito said, "This won't get us all the way there, obviously, but it's a start. Of course, if you're right and we're wrong, you have nothing to worry about. But if we're right, it'll give you an opportunity to see hard proof, and them as well." Benito gestured, not to the theater seats, where I could make out several black-clad members scattered in the darkness, but to a camera on a tripod that was recording us and the toy. I was even more confused now, because he was talking to us in a casual tone that implied he was continuing a friendly conversation we'd been having. I made eye contact with Bass, and more than anything, he just seemed curious and excited, eager to witness something he'd waited a long time to see. What in the hell had the magpie been making us say and or do? "I'm sorry," I said to Benito. "I got distracted for a moment. Can you please quickly repeat who you are, why we're here, and what's about to happen?" He seemed genuinely taken aback by this request. Amy said, "Yeah, like for viewers who are just joining the stream? People always tune in late." "We are the Samurai," he began, suddenly invigorated. "We are the emissaries of Zarkrax. We are here to break the simulation." He turned toward the camera and adapted a manner like he was a Bond villain, explaining how the deviousness of his master plan was exceeded only by the righteousness of his cause. "For you see," he began, "all of the world's greatest experts agree that our universe is an artificial creation. The logic is very simple. It is a certainty that human technology will evolve to the point that it can perfectly simulate reality, and once that occurs, it is also a certainty that humans will run countless simulations simultaneously, just as on any given day we are simulating tens of millions of fictional worlds in our video games." I immediately got bored with what he was saying and studied the kennel instead. It was maybe 10 feet long, 6 feet wide, and not quite tall enough for me to stand up. On one hand, it was clearly built to withstand the assault from multiple muscular dogs who badly wanted out. The frame the chain link was anchored to was metal, and the whole apparatus was bolted to the floor. The padlock Bass had placed on the gate opened with a combination, but surely a cage intended to hold 2 or 3 demoted wolves could not hold 3 humans who, combined, had the intelligence of 2 humans. "Therefore, statistically, we can conclude that we ourselves are living in a simulation," said Benito, who was apparently still talking. "This was known to be true even before physicists discovered that high-energy particles reveal time-space to be arranged in a neat, artificial grid. But we don't need to get into the messy details. All of you have observed evidence of the simulation, in the form of its glitches. Have you ever lost a small object, maybe a tool or a piece of jewelry, in a way that shouldn't have been possible? In my experience, virtually everyone has that story." It sounded like a rhetorical question for the camera, but the guy paused as if waiting for an answer from us. Amy said, "Sure," while glancing at her phone. It had been nice of the magpie to let us bring our phones along. We sat in silence again until the 3 of us realized Benito wasn't going to move on until she elaborated. When I was in 3rd grade," said Amy. "I was riding my bicycle down the sidewalk. I had a Barbie in my hand and dropped it in the grass. I immediately stopped, but the doll was just gone. I searched for an hour. It was broad daylight. My dad came by and we both looked for it, even checking places it couldn't possibly have gone. Never turned up." "Exactly," said Benito. "That is a glitch. Small objects routinely just fall out of the world. Have you ever actually finished a stick of lip balm before it disappeared? Or an ink pen? The system eventually just deletes them, either on accident or maybe just to free up memory." John said, "One could almost call this simulated world a kind of matrix." Amy muttered, "Oh God." She glanced back at the magpie, waiting for it to start howling. "Our group," said Benito, "has mapped the parameters of the simulation and found ways to manipulate it. That is, in fact, the entire purpose of the simulation, to develop entities who can become aware and break free from the NPCs who've been planted here to challenge us." "The what?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Non-player characters," said Amy, "like the computer-controlled characters in a game, right? We call them the empties, said Benito. The people who clearly do not have any kind of internal life, no self-reflection, no ability to perceive their place in the world, nothing like what you would call a soul. It is the duty of us, the real living persons, to break the simulation so that we can be freed from it. Like in the Matrix, I said. Thank you. We now know 100% of what we need to know about your belief system. We will all live by Matrix rules from now on if that will end this conversation. John already has the PVC clothes. He dressed like that all through high school. We mainly are waiting for you to get to the part where you explain how your belief system ties into this egg toy thing. The toy in the hands of an empty is just a toy. The toy in the hands of a human is a key, or part of a key that will manifest Zarkrax and crash the system. Amy said, "Ah, there it is." It was going to be a real struggle to keep from laughing at this guy. If I died getting eaten by a Zarkrax, I'd spend my last breath giggling at its name. I imagined something with tentacles and a flashing weak point in the center that you have to shoot exactly 3 times. The feeding ritual requires us to collect tissue from empties to prove that we accept that they are not real and cannot feel pain. The act of collection proves we have seen through the simulation. Amy said, "Yes, that all sounds great. So who's in charge of your group here? Is it you?" I said, "Trust me, it's not him." Benito shot a meaningful look toward Sebastian and said, "Your mind is not yet capable of grasping the answer to that question." Amy turned to Bass. "Do you think your sister is an NPC, Bass? She seemed real to me when I talked to her." Benito burst out laughing, then faced the camera. "So, as we have said, 2 of the 3 in this cage are human. 1 of them is not. I would hope that it would be apparent by now which one I'm talking about." He then turned back and stared directly at me. There's always this awkward moment when people say they've heard of me, because it's always going to come down to what they've heard, and more importantly, what they chose to believe. I worked under a pseudonym for years, but by this point, both my real name and fake name can both be found in books, articles, videos, at least one song. Lots of the biographical details you find out there are bullshit, but some are not. Those particular details tend to bias people's opinion against me, and by that I mean they start actively rooting for my home to be targeted by a cruise missile. John, Amy, and I exchanged glances. Then John said, "Ah, we actually knew that already. We feel like every friend group should have at least one non-human in it. It's not even a sensitive subject for us anymore." "That's certainly not what you were saying an hour ago," replied Benito through a smirk. Wait, this guy didn't know we were being mind-controlled? Was the magpie doing it without him knowing? Why? What the fuck is going on here? I said, "Look, we all remember what was said an hour ago, but now that we're all on the same page, why not leave me in here and let them go? Tons can only be collected from non-humans, so..." Benito was confused. "What good would that do?" He checked his watch and then held out a hand to Bass, who responded by wordlessly handing him the portal book, which we'd apparently brought with us. Benito peered into the book and said, "Hello, are you there?" There was a muffled answer from the other side, presumably the man who'd yelled at us when we tried to look through it earlier today. Bass then tore open a case of bottled water that was on the floor nearby and handed the bottles to Benito one at a time, who in turn fed them into the book, making a kind of ceremony out of it. "The irony," said Benito as he handed a bottle through, "is that the app and the actual feeding are really the same, once you know the truth. Cells from an empty are just pixels, like you see on the screen of your phone." He fed the last bottle into the book, and a moment later, something metal was handed back from the other side. It was a dirty, dented, elongated bowl, like something you'd see on the mess kit in a World War I trench. Benito set the bowl on the floor, then was in the process of closing the book when the voice from the portal yelled angrily at him. Benito grabbed the bowl, dumped its contents onto the floor at his feet, then handed the empty bowl back through the book before closing it. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised by the contents of the bowl. 4 pink human tons, each ending in a ragged mess of bright red where they'd recently been hacked out of a mouth. I heard Amy suck in a breath, but I was secretly relieved that they'd met their quota without having to slice anything out of us. "So one weird thing we've noticed about our, simulation over the years," said Amy, trying to keep her voice steady, is that if you kill or mutilate someone, you still go to jail. She stared down Bass, whom I noticed had quietly backed away from the stage. Even if it's just simulated jail, it feels very real, and the people who go there seem to hate it. I said, actually, I'm kinda done with this. Bass, hey, open the cage, right now. Oh, so you're losing confidence in your friend's little experiment, said Benito, looking at John. Sounds like they disagree with your point of view. I glanced at John, who of course had no idea what this guy was referring to, but seemed to also be done playing along. John said, Bass, if you don't let us out of here, I'm telling your mom. Bass looked more confused than ever, and I remembered that, for all we knew, his mother was tied up in the next room or dead at our hands. We'd been acting as puppets all evening. Hell, maybe we were the ones who'd given Bass a ride here. With that, the toy unleashed its obnoxious crying sound effect. Benito pulled out his phone, did the feeding through the app, and received the thanks from the electronic voice. Yummy, thank you, Mommy, I love you. He then grabbed 2 of the tons, 1 in each hand, and approached the kennel. I felt around my pants to see if maybe I'd wound up with some kind of weapon in my pockets during the time I wasn't in control of myself. No such luck. I said, Buddy, I'm telling you, you don't want to feed that thing, and we're not going to let you. We'll be doing you a favor. Nothing that is summoned into our world is going to obey you. The entities that lurk out there, they are very good at manipulating people like you and Bass to do what they want. That's because for the most part, they have no power here unless you give it to them. The more fear you show, the more we know we're right. All who are locked in the simulation are programmed to fear any disruption, just as an infant fears leaving the womb. As with the infant, your liberation will come with screams. He moved to the rear of the kennel so that he would be near the toy. The plastic egg opened just a little, maybe a 1/4 of an inch. I couldn't make out what was inside. Benito held a ton above the cage and dropped it in. I reached up to try to catch it before it fell into the egg, but the pink chunk of meat was snatched from the air and yanked downward in a blur. A hair-thin appendage had whipped up from the crack in the egg and pulled the meat down into the gap, leaving a red smear on the white plastic. All 3 of us recoiled. I noticed that Bass did too. A smirking Benito said, This thing will take your fingers right off if you try that again. Amy said, Okay, on some level you guys, all you guys, have to know this is a bad idea. Just mentally take a step back and think about what you're doing right now. Benito smirked and addressed the camera. Spoken like a true empty. A noise designed to test my resolve. Look, guys, the simulation even gave her freckles, as if playing to my fetish would make me weak in the knees. A character manufactured in a blink for this exact moment in time. I said, Wait, you think she's the non-human? Benito dropped in another ton. The egg snatched it out of the air before it fell halfway down, growing impatient for its meal. I admit, I didn't try very hard to interfere that time. All right, I said. I need you to listen to me very carefully, because I can absolutely get this cage open if you force me to, but I don't want this swallow thing to get out into the world, and I'm not totally sure that it won't just go grab the remaining tons off the floor regardless of what you do next. So, what you need to do is take the 2 tons that are left and, if you can, get very far away from here. Let us deal with this. Benito bent over and picked up the 2 remaining tons, 1 in each hand. It is in moments like these when humans like you and I can get distracted from the obvious truth of our humanity. But haven't you ever noticed that things seem to just kind of work out for you? That the disasters and mass deaths only target other people? That everything that happens seems intended to teach you, personally, a lesson? Like all of these background characters and movie extras, he gestured at Amy with a severed tongue, are just here to help you get context for yourself, for your own actions, your own nature. I assure you, when she's out of the view of humans, she ceases to exist. He turned to his right fist, which was clutching a severed ton, and said, Isn't that right? He wiggled the ton to make it flap, and in a high-pitched voice said, That's right, Jonas. He dropped the 3rd ton into the cage. The egg snatched it before it had even fallen all the way through the chain link. Benito yanked his hand back, counting his fingers. Addressing the camera, Amy said, For anyone out there watching this, if Mr. Swallow hatches and murders all three of us and gets out of this building, please call Dr. Albert Marconi. He's the guy that used to have all those ghost hunting shows on cable. Show him this video. If there's a chance this can still be fixed, he's the guy who can fix it. And please, don't blame this kid here. He's being manipulated. Oh, and please buy merchandise from our site. Somebody's going to get stuck paying for our funerals, and hopefully that will offset the costs. John said, I agree with all of that, aside from the part about not blaming this guy. There's 1 ton left. He can make a choice right now to stop whatever's about to happen. So I'm telling you, if he lets this swallow thing out and it wreaks havoc to, God forbid, lets some much bigger and worse monster into the world, find this dude and give him the ass beating he deserves. Benito reached over us with the 4th and final ton. The egg snatched it out of his fingers as they hovered above the chain link. He recoiled and then shook off flecks of blood. The magpie had sliced open his palm. We had all positioned ourselves to face the plastic egg, which was still just barely open. I thought I saw something moving in there. Knots of hair, tangles of white globs, human teeth, a licking tongue. I turned around to grab at the door of the kennel, shaking it. Hey! Hey! I kicked at the jamb, growling, doing more damage to my foot than the metal. Bess! One of you! Open this fucking thing! John. Dave sat back and nodded, now satisfied that the kennel just might hold. All right, he said, addressing the pale man in the overcoat wiping blood and ton juice off his hands, whom John had been mentally referring to as Benjamin Cumbadger. Pay attention. Whatever happens, do not open this cage. Because of your foolishness, it's now up to us 3 to destroy Mr. Swallow before it can get out there and hurt anybody. Amy, remind me, what's the next food the egg says it needs? Because that's what this little monster is going to try to collect from us when it hops out. Barely taking her eyes off the egg, Amy tapped at her phone and said, It was gumballs. 8 of them, it says. Vanilla. See? The man outside the cage was studying his own phone. More to the camera than anyone, he said, That one seems pretty obvious, wouldn't you say? Amy showed John her screen. The pixelated gumballs were round and white, with a smaller shadow in the middle, tinted blue. There was a hint of pink pixels around the edges that could almost suggest tiny thread-like veins. All right, said John. This thing is coming for our testicles. It needs 8. Between the 3 of us, we only have 5. John stripped off his shirt. One of us needs to act as bait. The other needs to trap this swallow thing, whatever it is, in my shirt. Amy, who was always one step ahead, said, I have deterrent music on my phone. We can control it with that. That is, assuming Swallow isn't going to turn out to be the size of a skyscraper. Remember, that egg is probably a portal, like that book. The creature doesn't necessarily have to fit in there. The music should work regardless of size, but let's hope it's not a kaiju-scale entity, because I don't want to have to pay for the damage its corpse causes when it goes down. Something was stirring inside the egg. Pink flesh pushed through the crack. One of the disembodied tons, now operating on its own. Amy readied her phone, ready to tap a play button. The 3 of them had no clear idea as to why unholy entities are repelled by, if not completely incapacitated, by beautiful music. One theory is that uplifting melodies are connected to the holy vibrations that emanate from the golden light at the center of all things, and that no creature that feeds on suffering can bear to be in its presence. Kind of like how it's hard to eat a steak if a cow is staring at you from across the table. Others say that what repels the darkness is not the music, but the effect that music has in strengthening the human spirit. There is a reason why victorious battle scenes in films are accompanied by the sounds of a triumphant orchestra. But in moments like this, all that matters is that it almost always works if you have chosen the right music. It must be a piece that instills the same joyous thrum of the soul in any human who hears it, one that transcends time, culture, and language. The particular track Amy had locked and loaded on her phone was Regulate by Warren G, featuring Nate Dogg. The plastic polka-dotted egg was pried partially open from within. What birthed itself into the kennel was a knot of hair, teeth, and tons in the shape of a starfish, like a sculpture from a serial killer's Etsy shop. It hopped out onto the floor, and the egg snapped closed behind it. The newborn horror was closest to Amy, and she quickly scooted backward, only having a couple of feet to go until her back banged into the chain link behind her. Then, The creature simply wasn't there anymore. Or rather, John could no longer see it. The floor was covered with a thin layer of silt, the dusty film that had been left behind by the flood and still remained on every neglected surface in town. Where the testicle-hungry creature had been, there were now only 4 moist spots where it stood on its ton appendages. Dave said, "Shit, I can't see it. Can you?" John and Amy both yelled that they couldn't. Then Amy said, "Track its little footprints." As she said it, those 4 moist ton prints became 6, then 8, tracks left behind as the creature moved. John held his shirt at the ready and said, "Now!" Amy hit play. There was a synth track and a whistle, followed by a voice urging the regulators to mount up. In response, there was a terrible shriek, and the tiny, moist ton prints in the dust took off, in the wrong direction, toward Dave. He recoiled and screamed like a man who was feeling a ravenous ton monster on his chest. He reached up and appeared to be fighting to keep the invisible swallow away from his face. "Ah!" he reported. "Get it off me!" Damn it, thought John. Whatever the magpie had forced them to do during their period under its control, they now knew one thing for certain. Dave's face had ended up smelling like balls. Dave was gritting his teeth, feeling the slimy creature crawling its way up onto his cheeks. Then he opened his mouth and bit something near his face that he could feel but not see. The creature shrieked, and Dave said, "Catch!" He chucked a squirming ball of nothing at John, who had his shirt ready like a net. He caught the thrashing monster and pulled the shirt around it like a bindle. John didn't know how long it would hold. The shirt was just a normal t-shirt, made of patches of crimson leather and golden chainmail. He raised it above his head and slammed it to the floor. Then he did it again with all his strength, intending to repeat the process until the tiny monster stopped thrashing. On Amy's phone, Warren G was being robbed of his Rolex after a dice game gone wrong. Would Nate Dogg arrive in time to regulate? "Amy!" shouted John as he slammed the swallow monster to the floor. "Bring your phone closer. Warren is about to say the part about how he wishes he had wings so he could fly away." Amy did as asked. The creature spasmed and shrieked. Outside the kennel, Benjamin moved closer, fascinated and more than a little nervous. John got the sense that this was the first time he'd actually seen a manifestation from the other side, and nothing about it was what he'd been imagining. Bass, on the other hand, was utterly awestruck, like he was witnessing an uncertain miracle, the long-lost lover who has returned from the grave but may still turn out to be a zombie. Amy brought her phone to bear on the thrashing little beast. John held the bundled shirt firmly to the floor. He reached into his boot for the ivory-handled dagger with the obsidian blade that he had just now noticed was in there. He had no idea if this creature could be killed by such a weapon, but its health was almost certainly not going to be improved by it. John raised the blade, and at the same moment, Benjamin made the fateful decision to run up to the kennel and yell, "Stop!" He put his fingers on the chain link, his face pressed against it. John swung the blade down, and the invisible creature burst through the shirt to avoid the blow, ripping open a hole in the direction of Benjamin's face. The man backed away from the kennel, startled but unsure of what was happening. He apparently could not see the creature any better than the 3 prisoners could. What he did see were strands of chain-link fencing first bending, then snapping and curling inward, the creature tearing its way out, proving that its kennel-escaping capabilities were beyond both dogs and humans. This, thought John, is why you use bulletproof glass instead. John yelled to Benjamin, "Fly, you fool!" The man did not move. Maybe it wouldn't have mattered if he had. The hole in the fencing opened enough for the creature to slip through, and in a blink, Benjamin's face was contorting in a way that John had never seen before, aside from one other time, when Arnold Schwarzenegger was exposed to the vacuum of Mars near the end of Total Recall. Benjamin's left eye was wide open, bulging unnaturally. He grabbed at his face, but his hand stopped an inch away, blocked by the body of the unseen creature that had latched onto him. "Damn it!" shouted John. "All of us were wrong. He's going for our eyes!" The man's eyeball bugged out farther and farther, the creature sucking it out of the socket. Benjamin screamed in a way that would ruin slasher films for you if you ever heard it. No actor can imitate it. It's the sound of an adult human reduced to infancy, the universe suddenly such a terrifying and treacherous place that the only reaction to it is to utterly abandon dignity and howl at it with your mind, body, and air. When you encounter that awful noise for real, actor screams seem like a half-hearted mockery in comparison. John, Amy, and Dave watched as the man's eyeball pulled itself out of the socket, then with a snap was severed from the muscles and optic nerve. The eye fell off his face, but was in the clutches of the invisible creature. It never hit the floor, jiggling to a stop an inch above the 4 wet prints in the dust. Then, the eyeball bounced and twitched, the creature swallowing it. Once it came to rest in Swallow's belly, the severed eye stopped moving, but remained visible. John saw a shape moving in the darkness of the theater. It was one of the nerds in the audience, making for the exit like he was being launched off the deck of an aircraft carrier. He was leading a pack, several of the dudes who'd come to watch having abruptly lost their enthusiasm for the project. Sebastian Galvatron chased after them, yelling at them to come back, to man up, to have faith. This prompted Dave to let out a howl of rage and grab the ragged hole in the chain link, ripping it open using the superhuman strength that Dave could summon from time to time, but that the authors of this account may have failed to mention prior to this moment. On the floor outside, the hovering, severed eyeball that marked the location of Swallow moved toward the screaming Benjamin. There was still another eye left to claim. The guy fell to his knees, and Swallow, marked only by the severed eyeball inside it, jumped up onto his upper arm. Seeing that Dave clearly wasn't going to get the fencing open in time to save the man, Amy yelled, "Get on the floor! Face down! Guard your face with your arms! We're coming!" Amazingly, Benjamin apparently heard this advice and still had enough of his wits about him to act on it. He threw himself to the floor, sealing off his face with his forearms. The floating eyeball and invisible ton-feet of Mr. Swallow danced around the floor at the perimeter of the prone man's defenses, leaving an arc of those little moist prints. Dave, trying to climb through the wound in the fencing, shouted to the few remaining guys out among the theater seats, hidden in shadows, the ones who hadn't lost their nerve. They were standing now, but weren't moving. "Help him! Hey!" They were muttering to each other, but none came to their friend's rescue. The creature crawled up Benjamin's forearm and pawed through his curly hair. Swallow apparently decided on its approach, and suddenly there was a spray of blood, bone, and dark curls as it drilled its way through the back of Benjamin's skull, the wound erupting like a shaken-up can of meat soda. Benjamin screamed right up until the part of his brain that controlled that function was shredded and ejected from the back of his cranium. His head thrashed around as the creature inside mined for its prize. A moment later, it emerged, invisible body covered in bits of brain and with now 2 human eyeballs floating in its gut. Amy slapped her hand over her mouth and was trying to blink tears out of her eyes. The creature hopped off the stage and disappeared into the vast, darkened theater. David squirmed his way through the gash in the fence and tumbled to the dusty stage, right next to Benjamin's corpse. "You!" screamed David toward the men in the seats. "Dipshits! Seal every exit, every window, every little hole that leads to the outside. Do not let this thing escape, and protect your eyes!" The dipshits didn't act like they heard him. They were freaking out now, looking at their dead friend and having a hushed and panicked conversation with each other. It really seemed like a pack of dudes watching everything fall apart and deciding that job number 1 is to figure out who was going to get blamed. Dave cursed and ran past the man who was now lying face down in a pool of his old personality. He jumped off the stage, down among the rows of moldy seats, scanning the floor for the monster. "Why can't we see this thing?" he yelled, knowing damned well that nobody had the answer. "Fuck!" Amy crawled through the hole in the kennel that was now twice as big as it needed to be for her frame. She crawled after David and held out the phone. Nate Dogg announcing that it was the G-Funk era and that you don't want to step to it. She made like she was going to toss it to him. "No!" he yelled back. "Keep it! Don't let this thing get near you!" Dave carried no weapon, but from the expression on his face, John thought that if the creature launched itself at him, he would just open his mouth and eat it out of the air in a single bite of rage. John climbed out of the kennel, pulled on his ripped shirt, and joined Dave among the filth-encrusted seats, his dagger at the ready. Amy was behind them, the sawn winding down. John figured that all 3 of them had to be thinking the same thing. Even if the creature had been 5 times bigger and wearing a flashing novelty Cinco de Mayo sombrero, it could hide forever in this big, dimly lit building, packed with seats it could crouch under. As it was, the little monster was only visible by the contents of its guts, and for all they knew, could climb walls or slip under doors. Dave said, "Look, there's the trail!" In the dusty floor was a track of smears the creature's tons had left in the layer of silt. The track, sure enough, led directly under the seats, and soon Dave was climbing across the rows, trying to follow them. John heard a commotion behind them. The dipshits had made their way to the stage, and were now messing with their magic portal book, arguing with each other, realizing all their grand plans were now just splatters on the floor. John was very familiar with that scene. Fuck 'em. Amy. Amy forced herself to look away from the dead man. She had seen a ridiculous number of corpses in her short life, and always imagined the ripple of notifications that ensued. A chain of gut-punch grief passed from parents to siblings to grandparents to friends to coworkers. The news crashing through unsuspecting lives like a tsunami. God, what if the guy had a baby at home? She could hear the dead man's friends back there, arguing. Not a hint of grief in those voices. She tried to find Bass, but he seemed to have left. Maybe to make sure the members who'd bailed out weren't going right to the police. Meanwhile, there was David, straddling 2 rows of theater seats and using the light on his phone to scan the floor, seemingly oblivious to the idea that the little monster could ambush him at any moment. The song had ended, and her phone went silent. She pulled it up to start it over. Dave made a motion as if to stop her. "We want to catch it. The music's going to drive it away." "It's going to eat your eyeballs!" "I'd rather it try than have it escape into the neighborhood. The trail veers over toward the wall. See anything over there?" John and Amy hustled over to the narrow aisle along the wall that led to the fire exit by the stage. This was apparently a high-traffic path, though, as the dust had been smeared aside by hundreds of footprints. John swept his phone light around, looking for a reflection off a tiny pair of bouncing human eyes. John muttered, "You see anything?" "No," said Amy, thinking that if she spotted the monster, everyone in the building would immediately know from the sound she made. From behind her, David said, "All right, we've got to block every possible exit point, but that means we have to recruit those morons to help. That could be a problem." He shot a glance at the stage, where the morons were kneeling around the corpse. "They may still want this thing to get out. See if you can talk to them. I'll keep looking. If I go up there myself, I'm liable to just start smashing their faces in." Amy thought it was a sign of progress that David recognized in advance a situation that he would likely have just made worse. The guys on the stage seemed to be in the process of feeding their dead friend's leg into the portal book, apparently trying to get rid of the corpse. At the moment, she didn't see how he'd possibly fit. All the men seemed fairly young, all wearing almost entirely black clothes. Way too many layers for this heat. One of them had a bucket and a sponge and was cleaning up brains from the floor. "Listen up," she said as she approached. "You guys have seen what that swallow monster is capable of. We have to do 2 things, and we have to do them right now. We have to keep it from getting out, and we have to separate it from the egg. If, God forbid, it collects the eyes from the people in this room, it can't be allowed to feed them to the magpie and start the next cycle. That means that first, we need to seal off the building, and then we need to corral Swallow into some kind of container that will hold it until we figure out what will kill it. Hey, stop doing that." One guy briefly glanced her way, then went back to work, cramming the dead man's leg into the book as if he'd heard a noise that turned out to be wind. The other 4 hadn't even done that. The book had already swallowed the corpse's right leg up to the knee. "Hey!" shouted Amy, waving her arms. "Are you listening? You guys get that this is a problem now, right? If we don't get on top of this, there will be between 3 and 6 more people either dead or in really bad shape before morning, at least." None of the 5 would even look at her now. One of them spoke to the man next to him. "All the streams show is Jonas reacting to something happening to his face. He backs up, and at that point, he's out of the shot. I cut the feed right after that. They'll have nothing. Remember, there are no humans in jail. Doesn't work like that." They resumed shoving their friend into the book, now having gotten his other leg in. Amy swore the book had grown bigger to accommodate the task somehow. Amy said, "Guys, what if the creature goes after somebody's baby? Are you picturing that? Crawling into a crib, sucking its eyeballs out?" One of the men who hadn't spoken yet said, "You hear something?" Another said, "Nope." Humans, David had once told Amy, find nothing more enthralling than the act of exclusion. Starting a club and locking out new members. Basking in the cruel joy of seeing a sad nose pressed to the window. If the members grew up as outcasts themselves, they'd sooner die than give up their chance to finally be the only ones on the warm side of the door. Amy had no idea how to get through to them. "Hey, dipshits!" yelled David from behind her. His face had gone hard and cold, the way it does. His decision to not make things worse had held out less than a minute. "You still agree that I'm a human being, right?" "As far as we know," said one of the men. "Great. As a real human living in this simulation, I am hereby declaring that all of you are dipshits. The little monster you've got running around? We catch and kill pests like it all the time, so I'm really sorry that your whole worldview has fallen apart, but, welcome to adulthood." The guy holding the book that had now eaten their friend up to the crotch said, "Nothing has changed. Jonas was an empty. We know that now. He was sent to tempt us." "Shut your idiocy hole. If you want to help contain this thing, do what she said and help us block off these exits. If you don't help and Swallow gets out, I'm telling you right now that I'm personally coming for you." Amy said, "Forget these guys. We need to get into the kennel and get the—" She stopped. The kennel, she now saw, was empty. "Where'd it go? Hey, where'd you take the egg?" The five still wouldn't even look at her. This triggered David's rage, and he started yelling, demanding to give the toy back. Amy didn't want to stick around for that argument. She already knew where it was headed. She turned and immediately ran into John, who had also apparently given up looking for the creature. It could already be outside for all they knew. She said, "They're useless to us." John nodded. "Don't worry, I have a better idea." He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Joy, it's me. I need you to get everyone together. Owen, Crystal, Munch, Head, Kelly, everybody. Tell them to each bring their vehicle to the Doll Enema Theater and park in a circle around the building. I need you to come too. Take my van. The keys are on the hook in the living room next to the Hallbird. Then, all of you will turn on your stereos at full volume and play Set Adrift on Memory Bliss by PM Dawn. We're creating a containment perimeter around the building. There's a creature on the loose, and if we're lucky, the musical energy will be so beautiful that it just paralyzes the beast where it stands." He paused. "That's right," he said. "Uh-huh, gotcha." He hung up and nodded to Amy. She said no. "They wouldn't have gotten here in time anyway." "But Joy did say that my van isn't there, which means the Magpie made us drive it here, and yeah, I've got my keys with me, so that makes sense. It's probably in the parking lot right out front. I've got 3,000 watts of sound system. I say go out there and crank it. Unleash positive waves so powerful that it pulverizes Mr. Swallow, and then everyone in the neighborhood just spontaneously starts fucking." "If you go out," said Amy, "you'd better be darn sure Swallow doesn't slip out with you. Oh, and don't let those guys leave, or if they do, don't let them take the portal book. We need to know exactly who's on the other side of it and whose tons got chopped out." He was already running toward the back of the theater, to the exit that led to the lobby. Amy went the opposite direction and made her way to the fire exit door next to the stage, which she knew led out to the alley out back. She could at least get some deterrent tunes playing at that door and cut off one route of escape. To be honest, she didn't really know what else to do. Amy pushed through the door and then pulled up like she'd smacked into an invisible wall. She was facing a dim hallway, packed with strange, shadowy figures. Her eyes soon adjusted to the dark, and she realized she was just seeing a bunch of old cardboard standees from movies, faded and warped with water damage. She pulled out her phone and activated the light, flinging deformed shadows across the walls. She shoved aside a standee for Legend of the Guardians, The Owls of Ga'Hoole. She scooted past another for Cats and Dogs, The Revenge of Kitty Galore, and knocked over the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, only to find the hallway was blocked entirely just ahead. Cardboard boxes of toilet paper and cases of bottled water had been stacked up next to a greasy old popcorn machine. There wasn't room to scoot around it without doing some heavy lifting. She heard a rustling nearby. One of the cardboard displays falling over, maybe? She heard it again. Mr. Swallow was here. Maybe. Amy slowly backed away. She considered yelling for David, but worried it would only attract the creature. She backed up some more, listening for any hint of movement around her, still hearing David and the guys barking at each other back in the theater. There was grunting and scuffling, like the argument had descended into a fistfight. She could hear nothing in the hallway around her now. Her only weapon was the music, but if Swallow was in the hall with her, playing it could just as easily force the creature toward the exit on the other side of the blockage. If so, could it get the door open and leave the building? She couldn't chance it. She took another silent step back, scanning all around her, listening. Still nothing. The silence was worse than literally anything else. She imagined the creature jumping on her face and sucking out her eyes, and that was all it took. She was doing the music, dang it. She still had her phone in her hand, and brought it up to start a new tune. And when she did, she found 2 severed eyeballs hovering over her thumb. She felt 4 human tongues squeezed around her fingers. A circle of human teeth pinched her skin. Amy screamed. Then, those 2 hovering eyeballs jumped up off her hand, and now she was staring right at them, a bloody optic nerve wrapped around one like a ribbon. She felt tongues and teeth on her cheeks and forehead. She screamed again and stumbled backward, and the world went blurry. Her eyes were being sucked out of her head. Wait, no, it was her glasses. They were being pulled away from her face, the creature apparently trying to figure out what had gotten between it and its prize. Then the frames snapped and the lenses shattered, bits of glass bouncing off Amy's cheeks. The creature shrieked, having pierced itself with glass, then tumbled to the floor, the glasses frame still in its clutches. Amy backed away, wanting to turn and run, but also terrified of losing sight of the thing. Wait, what was she saying? She had already lost sight of it. The world had turned into a blurry mess. She had miraculously not dropped her phone. With shaking fingers, she pulled up the music app and the monster leaped at her again. Amy squealed and spun, but it was now clinging to her shirt, the fabric being wrenched and pulled by invisible tongues. She dropped her phone and landed face up, and with the monster still clinging to her, Amy dropped to her knees and managed to hit the play button. Sweet Freedom by Michael McDonald filled the hall. The creature froze, then jumped away and took off like a shot. It was heading toward the boxes of toilet paper and the popcorn machine, which meant it was also heading toward the exit door in the alley. It skittered through the cardboard standees and slipped between two of the boxes blocking the path, vanishing from sight. Amy got up and stupidly tried to gather up her broken glasses as if they could somehow be fixed, the dozens of little shards glued together. "Amy!" It was David from behind her, barreling up the hall like a freight train. She said, "I'm fine. It went that way, through those boxes." David lowered his shoulder and knocked the boxes over, clearing enough of the path that he could climb over. The exit came into view. The door to the outside was standing wide open. It had been propped open by a brick, presumably by whoever had been hauling in the toilet paper and water. David skidded to a stop, eyes darting around the hall, then ran out and kicked the brick aside, pulling the door shut. He turned and met Amy's eyes. Neither of them said a word, because what they both knew didn't need to be said. There was no way the creature hadn't gone out that door and into the night, into a town full of unwitting citizens getting ready for bed. Amy's phone was still playing the song. "I forced it out," she hissed. I didn't know the door was open. I got scared and played the music, and I forced it out into the world. Oh my God, I'm so stupid. Oh my God." "Calm down," said David. "It could still be right here. Look around." He searched around the hall, muttering something about how this was still where a swallow could most easily shop for eyeballs. He was making a show of it, trying to make Amy feel better. She stared at the broken glasses in her palms and tried to hold herself together. Then she thought of her own admonishment from a minute ago, telling the Matrix nerds that, if allowed to escape, the swallow could go after somebody's baby. She thought she was going to be sick. A minute later, John's van blasted some hippie rap song, and the man himself turned up in the hallway soon after. He joined the hunt, scouring the building for any sign of the little monster, desperate to find it for the town's sake and for Amy's. They found nothing.